For years, the Maple Ridge community had carried a quiet imbalance, one that most residents sensed but rarely named. The HOA meetings were orderly on paper, yet the same voices always dominated. The same families always benefited, and the same few homeowners quietly absorbed the consequences. It wasn't loud injustice, it was slow, polite, and exhausting. The tension finally surfaced one evening, when the HOA announced another rule, enforcement targeting the Alvarez family. Their fence, which had stood unchanged for nearly a decade, was suddenly deemed non-compliant. The fine was small, but the message was not. For Mrs. Alvarez, who had watched others ignore similar violations without consequence, it felt like the last straw. At the next HOA meeting, the room was fuller than usual. Neighbors who normally stayed silent took seats along the walls, arms folded, expressions tight. When Mrs. Alvarez stood to speak, her voice trembled, not with fear, but with restrained emotion. She didn't argue measurements or bylaws. Instead, she spoke of patterns, of how complaints always seemed to land on the same doors, of how requests for repairs were ignored unless the homeowner had influence, of how respect felt selective. Her words shifted the air in the room. What began as a procedural discussion turned deeply personal. Others followed. A single father spoke about repeated parking, warnings while luxury cars blocked, fire lanes without penalty. An elderly woman described being dismissed when she raised safety concerns, only to see them addressed later for someone else. Each story added weight, revealing a history that had never been formally recorded but was widely lived. The HOA president attempted to regain control, citing rules and neutrality, but the tone had already changed. This was no longer about fences or fines. It was about dignity, about being seen, about years of swallowing frustration to keep the peace. Emotions ran high. Some board members grew defensive, others visibly uncomfortable. A few looked genuinely surprised, as if hearing these truths for the first time. When voices cracked and tears appeared, the room fell silent, not from authority but from recognition. By the end of the meeting, no vote was taken. Instead, a temporary review committee was formed, made up of residents who had never before been invited into decision-making. It wasn't a solution, but it was a beginning. As neighbors filed out, conversations continued in hushed tones. The injustice hadn't vanished overnight, but it had finally been named. And sometimes, that first shared truth is what turns long-standing silence into real change.